about inspecting both the inside and outside of the vehicle. In this section in particular, we're inspecting all the components on the inside, at least all the important components. And when it comes to your dashboard, there's multiple gauges on your dashboard, especially depending on the type of truck that you have. But every single truck has a minimum of these 4 gauges that I'm about to tell you, and I'm going to show you exactly how to read them. So the first gauge that we talk about, and they're in no specific order when it comes to the test itself, but one of the gauges you're going to have to talk about is your water temperature gauge. So this is actually going to tell you how hot your temperature of your engine is actually running. The maximum that you ever want to see is about 200. If you're ever getting higher than 200 degrees, that means either your water pump is bad or your fan is not kicking on, which means that it's not cooling off the engine. And if you run for long enough at a hot enough temperature, that's right, that explosion behind me is what's going to happen in front of you when you're driving this truck. So the second thing that you're going to have to work on is your oil pressure gauge. So your oil pressure gauge is making sure that the oil is flowing through the engine components properly. Here you want to see some oil pressure gauge. When you press on the gas itself, you should see the oil pressure gauge increase. There's no specific number that you need, but anywhere from that 40 to 80 range, 40 to 90 range is okay. If you're driving the truck and all of a sudden your oil pressure gauge is dropping big time, that could be a problem. That means that you could have a major oil leak because there's not enough oil running through the system itself. So when it comes to your water temperature gauge, you don't want to go in too high. When it comes to your oil pressure gauge, you don't want to go in too low. And the next gauge that you must talk about for your in-cab inspection is going to be your voltage gauge. So here is your voltmeter. So this is going to actually show you the charge of the battery itself and what the battery volts are at. So in a truck, you're going to have a 12-volt battery, which means if the gauge is pointing to the number 12, that means there's no charging happening from your alternator. So for the test itself, you're going to say, okay, this is my voltmeter gauge. It's in proper level and it's charging. It usually should be in between the 12 and 14 range. So anywhere from that 13 to 14, that means that it's going higher than 12 volts, which means it's actively charging the battery and everything's okay to go. So again, if you ever turn on the truck and your voltmeter is below 12, it's going to be a very, very hard time to start that vehicle because you're going to need at least 12 volts to get everything started and to run all of your electrical that you need. And that is what that voltmeter gauge is showing you. And the last gauge that you're going to have to talk about for your dashboard is going to be your air pressure gauge. So during the in-cab inspection, if you follow our system and if you want to find out more, click on the link below and you'll be able to see a full video description of exactly what the in-cab inspection is going to look like. But this air brake system is extremely important because it runs on air. And the cool thing about air is, so far, it is free. That being said, when you turn on the truck and the engine starts going, your air compressor starts kicking in and your air pressure gauge should be raising up, which means when you have air, you can move this vehicle. For whatever reason, if something is not working and the air pressure gauge is not rising up, either the gauge is faulty or something inside the engine is faulty. Maybe it's a bad air compressor, maybe you have a major leak that's happening. And if that's the case, you will not be able to move the vehicle because your brakes will be locked. So I hope that helped. Those are the 4 main gauges that you're going to have to talk about for your in-cab inspection. You do have other gauges like your speedometer, your tachometer, and depending on the truck, depending on the dashboard that you have, you might have some extra gauges as well. But those are the only 4 required gauges that you're going to have to talk about for the in-cab inspection during your road test itself to get your CDL license. And I gave you the importance of those gauges itself. So if you want help on how to pass the CDL road test, one of the cool